The first time Vivian Pierce called me her person in front of her entire family, nobody in the room even blinked. Not her sister, not her brother-in-law, not the cousins passing the mashed potatoes like nothing unusual had just been said out loud at a table full of witnesses. That was the moment I understood how far this had already gone without either of us naming it. My name is Eli Turner. I'm 33 years old. I managed the kitchen at a mid-sized restaurant in Denver, and for the better part of 4 years, I had been quietly becoming part of a family that was never supposed to be mine. I should back up, because none of this makes sense without the beginning. Jordan Pierce and I have been best friends since 7th grade. Since the day a science teacher paired us together for a project on ecosystems, and Jordan showed up to my house with a shoebox full of dead leaves and zero plan. We built something terrible. We got a C-. We've been inseparable ever since. 21 years of friendship does something to a person. It rewires what you consider family. By the time we were in our 20s, Jordan's parents, Frank and Vivian, had become something like a second set of parents to me. The kind of people whose refrigerator you opened without asking, whose couch you fell asleep on during football games, whose home smelled like cinnamon and coffee in a way that made you feel like nothing bad could happen inside those walls. Frank died 4 years ago. Heart attack, sudden, no warning. The kind of death that doesn't give anyone time to prepare a version of themselves that can survive it. Jordan was overseas for work when it happened, some 6-week project in Singapore that could not be moved, could not be rescheduled, could not bend to something as inconvenient as his father dying on a Tuesday afternoon. He flew back as fast as any human being can fly back from the other side of the planet. But grief does not wait politely for flights to land. Somebody had to be there in the meantime. Somebody had to sit in that hospital waiting room, sign the paperwork nobody wants to sign, call the funeral home, and stand beside Vivian while she absorbed the fact that the man she had built 31 years of marriage with was simply gone. That somebody ended up being me. I don't say that to sound noble. I say it because it's the honest hinge point of this whole story. I wasn't trying to fill a role. I was trying to be useful in a moment where nothing useful existed. I drove Vivian home from the hospital because she couldn't remember where she'd parked. I sat with her at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning while she stared at a mug of tea she never drank. I answered the door for people bringing casseroles neither of us would eat. I did the things a person does when someone they love is drowning, and the only thing you can offer is your presence, not a solution. Jordan came home 5 days later, and grief did what grief always does to people. It made him quiet in ways that weren't cruel, just distant, like his mind was somewhere else even when his body was in the room. He loved his mother fiercely, but grief and love don't always know how to sit in the same chair together. He worked longer hours in the months after, not because he didn't care, but because staying busy was the only language his pain understood. Somebody still needed to check on Vivian on the ordinary Tuesdays when there was no funeral to plan and no casserole being delivered, just a woman learning how to live inside a house that used to have 2 people in it. So I kept showing up, not out of obligation, not out of pity, because somewhere in those first few months, checking on Vivian stopped being something I did for Jordan and became something I did because I wanted to know she was okay. I want to be careful here, because I know exactly what this story sounds like from the outside, and I promise you it did not start where you think it started. For the first year, it was small things. I'd stop by on my way home from a closing shift and find her still awake, and we'd split whatever leftovers she had in the fridge and talk about nothing important. I fixed her garbage disposal once because she refused to call a repairman and admit she couldn't do it herself. She started leaving a second coffee mug out on the counter without ever mentioning it, just a quiet assumption that I'd be there Sunday morning. Vivian was 54 then, a hospice nurse for almost 2 decades, a woman who had spent her entire career sitting with other families through the exact kind of loss she was now living through herself. She understood grief the way most people understand their own hands, and somehow that made her generous with mine, even when I didn't know I was carrying any. Jordan noticed the visits, of course. He never seemed bothered by them. If anything, he seemed relieved. "Thanks for checking on her," he said more than once, usually distracted, usually already thinking about something else. I know work's been crazy for me. It helps knowing someone's around. I told him it was nothing. For a long time, I believed that. The 2-year mark passed. Then the third. Vivian started laughing again. Really laughing, the kind that used to disappear entirely in the months after Frank died. She started painting the guest room a color Frank would have hated, which she told me with a kind of defiant satisfaction that made me grin for the rest of the night. She joined a book club she quit after one meeting because, in her words, those women read the same 3 thrillers and call it literature. She was becoming herself again, and somewhere in there, I noticed I looked forward to our Sunday mornings more than almost anything else in my week. I didn't examine that too closely. Some things you leave unopened because you suspect what's inside. Then came the Thanksgiving that changed everything. It was hosted at Vivian's house that year. Same as always, the whole extended Pierce family packed into a dining room built for 8, but somehow fitting 14 every single November. Jordan's Aunt Denise was there with her husband, their 2 grown kids, a cousin named Marcus who brought his new girlfriend, and spent the entire meal trying to impress everyone with a story about a marathon he hadn't actually finished. Jordan's Uncle Ray carved the turkey badly, same as every year, and everyone pretended not to notice the unevenly hacked slices landing on their plates. I'd been coming to this dinner for years. Nobody questioned my presence anymore. I brought the same dish every time, a cornbread stuffing recipe Vivian had taught me, and I sat in the same spot near the end of the table, close enough to the kitchen that I could help refill drinks without anyone having to ask. That year, Denise's husband, a soft-spoken man named Paul who I'd met maybe 3 times total, turned to Vivian partway through the meal and asked, not unkindly, just out of simple curiosity, "Remind me how you 2 are related again?" He nodded toward me. Vivian didn't miss a beat. She set down her fork, looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read yet, and said, "Eli's not related. He's my person." That was it. That was the whole sentence. No further explanation offered, none requested. Paul nodded like that answered everything, went back to his plate, and the conversation moved on to whether Marcus had actually run the full 26.2 miles or bailed at mile 20 like his girlfriend seemed to suspect. Denise didn't blink. Ray didn't blink. Jordan, sitting 2 seats down, didn't even look up from his plate. Nobody in that room questioned it. I sat there holding my fork, feeling something shift underneath me that I couldn't name yet, watching an entire family accept a sentence that should have raised at least one eyebrow and raised none. Her person, not her son's friend, not a family friend, not even like a second son, which is the phrase people usually reach for when they want to describe closeness without complication. Her person, singular, specific, chosen. I looked at Vivian. She was already looking at me, and for half a second, something passed between us that neither of us was ready to say out loud yet. Then she smiled, small and a little embarrassed, and reached for the gravy like she hadn't just said something that rearranged the furniture of my entire life. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept turning the sentence over, testing it from different angles, trying to figure out whether I was overreacting to 4 words spoken casually at a dinner table, or whether I had just witnessed the truth finally slip out in front of witnesses before either of us had agreed to admit it privately first. I thought about the years of Sunday mornings, the second coffee mug she never explained, the way she remembered which stories I hadn't finished telling and asked about them a week later, the particular quiet of her kitchen that had somehow become the quietest, safest place in my entire life. I thought about Frank, too. About whether there was something wrong with a man finding comfort in the widow of the closest thing he'd ever had to a father figure. I turned that thought over the longest, because it deserved the longest look. But the more honestly I examined it, the more I understood that whatever this was between Vivian and me had grown out of grief the way a tree grows out of a burned field, not despite the loss, but through it, slowly, honestly, without either of us cutting corners or rushing towards something inappropriate. Frank had been gone 4 years. Vivian had grieved him properly, completely, without shortcuts. And somewhere in the middle of that long, careful grief, something else had quietly taken root beside it. That didn't make it simple. It just made it real. I called her the next morning instead of texting, which was already unusual for us. "You're up early," she said when she answered, her voice carrying that familiar warmth that made every conversation with her feel like sitting near a fireplace. "Couldn't sleep," I admitted. "That bad turkey, or something else?" I paused long enough that she noticed. "Eli, can I come by?" I asked. "I think we should talk about yesterday." There was a silence on her end, not panicked, just thoughtful, the kind of silence that told me she'd been waiting for this call longer than she probably wanted to admit. "Yeah," she said finally. "I think we should." I drove over within the hour. Vivian answered the door in an old cardigan, her hair still slightly damp from a shower, holding 2 mugs of coffee like she'd started making them the moment she hung up the phone. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd once watched her stare blankly into a mug of tea she never drank, the same table that had absorbed 4 years of our ordinary Sundays. "You said something at dinner," I started. "I know what I said. I've been thinking about it all night." Her hands wrapped tighter around her mug. "So have I." I looked at her directly, because I'd promised myself on the drive over that I wasn't going to dance around this. "Did you mean it the way it sounded? Or was it just a thing people say?" Vivian was quiet for a long moment, long enough that the silence itself became an answer before her words caught up to it. "I've called you a lot of things over the years," she said carefully. "Jordan's friend. A good kid. Someone I trust." She looked down at the table. I don't know when her person became the truest one, but it did. Somewhere along the way, it did. My chest went tight in a way I wasn't fully prepared for. "Vivian, I know how this looks," she said quickly, cutting me off before I could finish, like she needed to get the hardest part out before either of us lost the nerve. "I know what people would assume if they thought about it too long. I'm 54. You're my son's best friend. I buried my husband 4 years ago, and here I am saying something like that out loud in front of my whole family, like it's the most natural sentence in the world." Her voice wavered slightly. "Maybe I shouldn't have said it that way. Maybe I should have kept it to myself." "Don't," I said. "Don't take it back just because it's complicated." She looked up at me, eyes bright in a way that made my next breath feel harder to find. "I'm not upset you said it," I told her. "I've been sitting with it since yesterday, and I don't think I want you to take it back. I think I want to know if it's true." The kitchen went very quiet. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked twice and stopped. "It's true," Vivian said finally, her voice steady even though her hands weren't. "You showed up for me when my own son couldn't, not because he didn't love me, but because grief does that to people. It scatters them. You didn't scatter. You stayed. And somewhere in 4 years of staying, I stopped seeing you as Jordan's friend who happened to be kind to his widowed mother, and started seeing you as someone I looked forward to more than I probably should admit." She exhaled slowly. "That terrifies me, Eli. Not because it's wrong. Because of what it costs if it goes badly. I could lose you. I could lose the version of my relationship with my son that survives this. I've already lost enough people to last several lifetimes." I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine, the same way I had 100 times before when comforting her felt like the only right thing to do. This time it felt different. This time it felt like a choice, not a reflex. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. "Whatever this is, however it needs to unfold, slow or careful or complicated, I'm not going anywhere." Vivian's eyes filled, but she laughed a little through it, the sound cracking in the middle. "You say that now. I mean it now. I'll keep meaning it later." She turned her hand over so our palms met properly, fingers threading together for the first time in 4 years of hands brushing accidentally over dish towels and car keys and casserole dishes. "We have to tell Jordan," she said, "before anyone else does. Before this gets complicated in a way we can't control." I nodded, even though the thought of that conversation made my stomach drop straight through the floor. "I know. He's going to be upset. Maybe." "No," she said gently. "He will be. Not because it's wrong, but because it's unexpected, and unexpected things feel like betrayals before they feel like anything else. Give him time to get past the first feeling before you judge him for it." I told her I would. I meant that too. We didn't rush into anything after that conversation. That part matters, because I think if we had, this story would have gone very differently. For the next several weeks, things between us shifted in small, careful ways. Sunday mornings stayed Sunday mornings, except now she made my coffee exactly the way I liked it without asking. And I started noticing the particular way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous about something she wasn't saying yet. We didn't kiss. We didn't rush to define anything with a label bigger than what we already had. We just let the truth exist quietly in the space between us while we figured out how to tell the one person whose reaction mattered most. Jordan found out sooner than we planned, and not the way either of us wanted. It happened at his place, on a Friday night that started as an ordinary hangout, beer and a basketball game neither of us was actually watching. Jordan had been distracted all evening, checking his phone more than usual, and around the third quarter, he set his beer down and looked at me with an expression I didn't recognize on him. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Sure. Are you and my mom together?" The question landed like a dropped plate, sudden and impossible to unhear. I set my own beer down slowly, buying myself half a second I didn't actually have. "Where's this coming from?" "Marcus's girlfriend saw you two at a restaurant downtown last week. Said it looked like a date." I told her she was wrong. He was watching me carefully now, the game entirely forgotten. Tell me she was wrong. I could have lied. For one brief, cowardly second, I considered saying it was just dinner, just two people who cared about each other catching up, nothing more. But I had promised Vivian I wouldn't let this unravel through someone else's careless retelling, and lying to Jordan's face felt like a betrayal worse than whatever discomfort the truth was about to cause. "She wasn't wrong," I said. "Not entirely." Jordan went very still. "What does that mean?" "It means your mom and I have gotten close over the last few years. Closer than either of us expected. We were going to tell you, Jordan. We just hadn't found the right time yet." "Close how?" His voice had an edge now, quiet but sharpening fast. "Because close is a word you use about a friend. It is not a word you use about the woman who used to pack my lunches. I know how this sounds." "Do you?" He stood up, pacing now, running a hand through his hair. "Because from where I'm standing, it sounds like my best friend has been dating my widowed mother behind my back for God knows how long, and I'm finding out from Marcus's girlfriend instead of either of you." "Nothing's happened behind your back," I said, keeping my voice level even though my pulse was hammering. "Nothing physical, nothing we're hiding for shame. We were being careful, Jordan, because we knew exactly how much this would matter to you, and we didn't want to spring it on you halfway formed." "Careful," he repeated bitterly. "You've been coming to Thanksgiving for years. You've had keys to her house since I don't even know when. And this whole time you were what? Falling for her? It didn't start that way. Then how did it start?" His voice cracked slightly, and underneath the anger I could hear something rawer, something closer to grief than jealousy. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you took my dad's spot in his own kitchen while I was too busy grieving him properly to notice you'd moved in." That one hit harder than anything else he could have said, because it wasn't wrong in the way it felt, only wrong in the way it landed. I understood, suddenly and completely, that Jordan wasn't only angry about a relationship he hadn't consented to knowing about. He was angry at himself, at the years he'd spent working through his own grief in a way that had quietly left space for someone else to fill the gap he'd left behind without meaning to. "I never tried to replace your father," I said carefully. "Nobody could. What I did was show up on the ordinary days when nobody else was showing up, because your mom needed someone and you were half a world away trying to survive your own version of losing him. I didn't plan for it to become what it's become. It just did, slowly, honestly, over years, not months." Jordan didn't answer right away. He stood at the window with his back to me, shoulders tight, and for a long moment the only sound in the apartment was the muted commentary from the game, still playing on the television neither of us was watching anymore. "I need you to leave," he said finally, quiet now instead of loud, which somehow felt worse. I didn't argue. I gathered my jacket, my keys, and left without another word. because some conversations need distance before they can turn into anything productive. I called Vivian from my car before I even pulled out of the parking lot. He knows, I said. How? Marcus's girlfriend saw us at the restaurant last week. Vivian was quiet for a moment. How bad was it? Bad, I admitted. He asked me to leave. She exhaled slowly, and I could hear the ache in it, even through the phone. I'll call him. Vivian. He's my son, Eli. Whatever this costs, I owe him the truth from me, not secondhand, not through gossip at a barbecue. Let me handle this part. She called Jordan that night. I don't know exactly what was said between them, because that conversation belonged to the two of them, and I never asked her to hand it over to me in full. What I do know is that it lasted almost 2 hours, that Vivian cried at some point, that Jordan hung up without saying goodbye, and that neither of them called me again that night. The next 3 weeks were the hardest of the whole thing. Jordan stopped answering my texts. Not dramatically, not with some cutting final message, just silence, the specific kind of silence that comes from someone who needs space more than he needs an argument. I respected it. Even though every day it stretched on felt like losing a limb I didn't know how much I depended on. 21 years of friendship doesn't disappear because of one uncomfortable revelation, but it can go quiet in a way that makes you wonder if the friendship survives the silence or just outlasts it out of habit. Vivian and I leaned on each other during those weeks in a way that made the relationship feel more solid, not less, even as the guilt sat heavy in both of us. We talked honestly about whether we should slow things down, give Jordan more room, maybe even step back entirely if that's what it took to repair things. Neither of us wanted that. But we both agreed we weren't willing to build something happy on top of something that had broken her relationship with her only child. I won't choose between you, Vivian told me one night, sitting on her porch with 2 mugs of tea going cold between us. I refused to. But I also can't pretend it doesn't tear something out of me every time I think about how this is landing on him. What if he never comes around? I asked, voicing the fear neither of us had said aloud yet. She was quiet for a long moment, watching the streetlight flicker at the end of the block. Then we'll carry that grief too, she said finally. Same as we've carried everything else. But I don't believe that's where this ends, Eli. Jordan loves his father's memory too much to want either of us pretending to be less happy than we are, once he has time to actually see it instead of just reacting to it. She was right, though it took longer than either of us hoped. Jordan called me on a Tuesday evening, almost a month after the night he'd asked me to leave his apartment. I almost didn't recognize his name on my screen after so much silence. Can we talk? He said when I answered. In person. We met at a diner neither of us had history with, neutral ground, the kind of place that doesn't hold memories either way. Jordan looked tired when he sat down across from me, the specific exhaustion of someone who has spent weeks working through something too large to rush. I talked to my therapist about this, he started, which surprised me, because Jordan wasn't someone who volunteered that kind of information easily. She said something that stuck with me. She asked if I was angry because it was wrong, or angry because it was unexpected. What did you decide? Unexpected, he admitted. Mostly unexpected. I think some of it was also guilt. I wasn't there for my mom the way I should have been after Dad died. I was there for her, technically, but not really, not in the way she needed. And some sick part of me has spent the last month being angry at you for doing the job I should have done better. I let that sit for a moment before responding. You were grieving too, Jordan. Nobody expected you to be perfect in the middle of losing your father. I know that logically, he said. It just doesn't feel that way sitting across from the guy who apparently became my mom's whole world while I was too busy surviving to notice. I never wanted to take anything from you, I said. I still don't. If there's a version of this where I have to step back to protect your relationship with her, tell me now, and I'll figure out how to live with that. Jordan looked at me for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes. That's the thing, he said quietly. I don't actually want that. I've spent a month being furious about this, and somewhere underneath the fury, I kept coming back to the same fact. My mom is happier than I've seen her since before Dad got sick. And the person who made that happen is you. I can be angry about how I found out. I can't actually be angry about that. Something in my chest loosened for the first time in weeks. Jordan, I'm not saying I'm fully okay yet, he said quickly. I'm saying I want to be. I need some time to get used to the idea properly, without the ambush part attached to it. But I don't want to lose either of you over this. Not my best friend, not my mom's happiness. That's too much to lose over something that, when I actually sit with it, isn't wrong. Just weird for me personally. I laughed a little, relief cracking through the tension in my shoulders. Word I can live with. I was worried about permanent. Don't get comfortable, he said, but there was the faintest trace of his usual dry humor creeping back into his voice. I still reserve the right to make this uncomfortable for you at every family dinner for the rest of your natural life. That feels fair. We sat in that diner for another hour, working through the parts that still needed working through, not fixing everything in one conversation, because some things don't fix in one conversation, but starting the process honestly instead of avoiding it. When we finally left, Jordan hugged me at the door, brief and a little awkward, but real. Take care of her, he said quietly. I mean that as your friend, not just as her son. Always have, I told him. Didn't realize I was allowed to say it meant something more until recently. He shook his head, huffing out something between a laugh and a sigh. 21 years, and you finally surprised me. Never saw this coming. Neither did I admitted. Not really. It just happened the way honest things happen, slowly, until it wasn't slow anymore. Vivian and Jordan had their own reckoning over the following weeks, separate from mine, the kind of repair work that belongs strictly between a mother and her son. I stayed out of it as much as I could, offering support without inserting myself into conversations that weren't mine to referee. Slowly, carefully, the three of us found a new shape for what our family looked like. One that didn't erase the old one, but made room for something that had grown honestly out of loss instead of replacing it. 6 months after that Thanksgiving dinner, Vivian and I made things official in the plainest sense of the word. No dramatic announcement, just an evening where she reached for my hand across the same kitchen table where everything had started and said, I'd like people to know we're together, properly, whenever you're ready. I told her I'd been ready for a while. I just hadn't wanted to rush her past her own readiness. We told the rest of the family gently, deliberately, giving each person room to react in whatever way they needed. Denise cried, but the good kind. Ray made an off-color joke that Vivian swatted him for immediately. Marcus asked if this meant I'd be at even more family dinners, and seemed genuinely delighted when Vivian told him yes. Jordan came around fully about a year after that first difficult conversation in the diner. It happened gradually, the way real healing usually does, not through some single dramatic gesture, but through 100 small ones. He started texting me again the way we always had, dumb jokes and sports arguments and updates about nothing important. He came to Sunday dinners at his mother's house and didn't flinch anymore when he found me already in the kitchen, coffee in hand. Exactly where I'd always been. The moment I knew we had fully crossed into something solid came almost 2 years after that first Thanksgiving. At another holiday dinner at the same table, the same slightly uneven turkey carved by the same uncle who never seemed to improve at it. A distant cousin I'd never met before turned to Jordan and asked, gesturing toward me, Wait, how are you two related again? Jordan didn't hesitate. That's my mom's person, he said, like it was the simplest fact in the world, like it always had been. And honestly, my friend too. Family, either way. Nobody at that table questioned it. Not one person raised an eyebrow, asked a follow-up question, or looked twice. It had become, simply and completely, the truth of who I was in that family, spoken out loud without hesitation by the one person whose approval had once felt like the hardest thing in the world to earn. Vivian and I got married the following spring. A small ceremony in her backyard, the same yard where 4 years earlier I had sat with her at 2 a.m. while grief threatened to swallow her whole. Jordan stood beside me instead of beside her, which felt right in a way neither of us had to explain to anyone. He gave a toast that started as a joke about how he'd been ambushed by his own family, and ended with him crying harder than anyone else in attendance. saying that watching his mother laugh like that again, easily and completely, was worth every uncomfortable month it had taken him to get there. People ask us sometimes how we met, how something like this even starts, and Vivian usually tells the short version. She says a boy showed up when she needed someone and simply never stopped showing up. I usually add the part she leaves out, that it took a careless sentence at a Thanksgiving table for either of us to admit out loud what had already been true for longer than we wanted to acknowledge. Grief has a strange way of clearing space in a life you didn't know needed clearing. It took everything from Vivian for a while, and somehow, in the middle of that emptiness, it made room for something neither of us expected or planned, something that grew slowly enough to be honest and carefully enough to be real. Some families are built the ordinary way. Ours got built out of loss, patience, a lot of Sunday mornings, and one sentence that nobody in the room thought twice about. So tell me, if your best friend's parent introduced you to the whole family with a phrase like that, one that quietly rewrote the nature of your relationship without asking permission first, what would you have done in that moment? Would you have let the sentence stand the way I did? And have you ever had a relationship that grew so slowly and so honestly that you didn't notice how deep it had gotten until someone else said it out loud for you? Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.